Hey everyone, today we're going to be watching a video called Evil Races Are Bad Game Design by Extra Credits. And if you know anything about them, they usually make decent videos, but they kind of will try to poke the bear on occasion and say stuff that either doesn't make sense or is only half makes sense just so that they can, get people's inputs and stuff like that for the clicks pretty much. And today we're going to be looking through this video. It's about 9 months old and there's a good number of people that have already responded to it, but I think when you make certain videos like this and it has the possibility of, influencing someone, as many videos as you can make criticizing anything are important so that other people could possibly watch them and understand how either yes, this is a good take or no, this is a terrible take. So we're going to be, going through it. We're going to be pausing at certain points and then discussing the things they're talking about.
If you paid attention to the game's discourse on the internet during 2019 and 2020.
Okay, I'll stop right here. The discourse he's talking about really wasn't a thing except for games journalists. They would say orcs are bad, and if you think that, you're actually tying it into real life racism, which I would actually question the journalist's thoughts if he's willing to tie, let's say, a black person to an orc. It makes absolutely no sense.
You might have noticed a reoccurring argument about some species from fantasy media, specifically orcs. Now, not to worry, this episode isn't going to be just another member of the chorus talking about how if all orcs in a game are blindly evil, that it's racist. Instead, we want to discuss how that particular choice is simply bad game design.
Alright, let's see if they make any good points, and let's see.
Thanks so much.
Oh, yeah, skip that. They're your advertisers, not mine.
That characterizing a whole species in
Let's go back a second.
Much of the recent conversation on orcs points out that characterizing a whole species in your game as ugly, warlike, and malevolent might be harmful to real-world group.
They literally just said they weren't going to bring it up. Now, granted, this is the only time they really bring it up, but no one thinks this way. This is a straw man, because no one takes a race, usually, from a fantasy or a sci-fi and puts it into a real class of, I wouldn't even call it's not race, it's melatonin and different culture. It's not really a real race. It makes very little sense.
Groups regularly mischaracterized as ugly, warlike, and malevolent. However, this video isn't that. Though if you want more on that discussion, Mendez breaks it down wonderfully over on his website, and we'll have a link to that in the description.
If that's the discussion, I don't think it's worth having, because so many people have already done it, and almost all of them are terrible takes.
But here, we're going to talk about something related. Why characterizing a group like this in your game can be lazy at best, and at worst, actively harmful to the world you're creating. When designing a game's world and populating it with fictional species, a designer might be tempted to differentiate them from one another by certain inalienable qualities, like their moral alignment, violent versus peaceful, law versus chaos, good versus evil, and the like.
Which are not terrible inherently. If you read sci-fi or fantasy or play games or whatever, some races have more inclinations for violence or what we would call chaos. Maybe that's just normal for them. Perception is big. Why would a race have a warlike culture? Maybe because it's what they needed to survive. But if you're the normal person trying to live in your house, and this guy is burning everything to the ground, you would call that chaotic and warlike.
It's a common trope in speculative fiction, but especially in the context of a game, painting an entire species with the same moral brush actually weakens the entire thing. This idea that a certain subgroup...
Okay, real quick. It depends on the story, right? Some games want to have really in-depth looks at things, and that is fine. That's perfectly good. It can help to the story, but certain games your shoot 'em ups or just those games where you just you turn your brain off and you just want to see cool things explode or kill things, you don't care. You literally do not care who you're facing so long as you get to kill them, in a sense.
like race, nationality, or sex, has inalienable traits, is called biological essentialism or simply bioessentialism. And it's a valid way to talk about qualities like how many legs an animal has or whether it can fly. But all too often, this concept gets misused in untrue statements, like pit bulls are a violent breed, men are more logical than women, or Asians are better at math. Now chances are, if...
Okay, but certain things about bioessentialism could be brought up. For example, averagely, men are stronger. Averagely. Or women have an extremely high pain tolerance compared to men, which is a thing no one talks about enough. Like, that is actually pretty cool to have such a high pain tolerance like that. And again, women can give birth, men cannot. So, certain aspects of bioessentialism are okay to bring up. And if we're talking about like sci-fi races, bioessentialism will literally give you the idea of how races would act under certain circumstances.
If a game is set in the real world, that the designers are avoiding these tropes because they aren't real, as multiple fields of societal and hard science can readily prove to you. But speculative fiction offers us an opportunity to reify or make real various things which don't exist, or to exaggerate things which do. Now, bioessentialism is a tempting idea in fantasy for some of the same reasons as it is in the real world. Because to our human minds, broad generalizations are comforting.
Okay. The thing, though, is I think the thing about bioessentialism that is very interesting is humans are so diverse, thought-wise, looks, stuff like that. What if we found another race that wasn't like that? Like, maybe the reason why they advanced so much was because that they really don't have that many differing thoughts, opinions, and stuff like that. So they all were able to unite under one banner to get something done when humans can't do that. Or something to that effect. Like, it's not just lazy writing. You can take a simple idea and with good writing make it seem amazingly complex. So that's a disagreement on the video.
Reduce the world to simple cut and dry categories. All orcs bad, all elves good, root for these folks, not for these folks.
Even though many people prefer the bad guys over the quote-unquote good guys.
But just like in the real world, bioessentialism can present problems in fiction as well, specifically a moral one. The idea that a sapient species can inherently tend towards good or evil acts, or lawful or chaotic ones, and that moral essentialism actually undercuts the greatest strength games can bring to storytelling. The player's own power to make meaningful, interesting choices and judgments for...
Okay, so this is a good point to bring up. Choices only matter in context. So, if I make a story and I say, hey, save this person, the game is different depending on who you save. That is a good choice, and it is a good choice to put someone down the path of. As a storyteller, you are taking the person reading or playing your thing, and you're taking them on a journey. They're in that little roller coaster. They're going along for the ride. And the choices they make, you are still instructing. They may have a thought afterward about like something, but in that initial playthrough, you are the conductor. You are literally leading them down a way of like seeing something. So even your choices in all reality are still constructed from someone who made the media.
Or their characters, including moral ones. So if a game's creative choices apply a moral valuation to every member of an entire species before the players even meet them, well, now that's just taking that power away from the players. And in turn...
That is also a element of gaming, because sometimes you need to stop gamers from doing stupid things or things that are not essential to the story. There is a place for open world choice in games, but if you're making a very story-driven game, it is hard for it to be open world plus highly story-driven, because you want a character to do this, they destroy the meta by doing something else. It can work, but it is very tough to do.
If a group of orcs, for instance, doesn't even have a choice about their actions, are they actually evil? Because look, if a person, say, destroys a house, we call that evil because they chose to do so. But if a tornado destroys a house, well, I mean, is wind evil?
If a whole sentient race decides that plundering and stuff like that is a way of living, you have a right to say that is chaotic or warlike. And that could also be evil, obviously. Again, it depends on the media.
No. Therefore, if a game's world building chooses to program every member of a species to destroy, aren't they more like the tornado? Now, if the player's characters are able to make moral choices, but an entire class of NPCs is inherently evil regardless of their choice, then the game is either telling the player that moral choices don't matter, or it's simply driving a wedge between the player's morality and the morality that applies to the rest of the world, blocking the player from further becoming a part of it. For instance, in Warhammer 40k.
Okay, I'm gonna let him go through the whole thing, but this is bad. This is actually really, really bad.
This inconsistency is central to the Imperium of Man's villainous creed. Individuals' human choices make them good or evil, whereas aliens are created evil. And of course, Games Workshop made that choice to facilitate a war game where lethal violence is the only option. But then folks also saw that in the 40k novels and RPGs, which required more interesting narrative complexities, Imperial heroes have to grapple with and recognize the illogic of that creed based on their own experience. Okay, but now you might...
Okay, so 40k is literally telling you everyone's evil. Everyone. The Imperium of Man, the Orcs, the Tau, the Tyranids, the Necrons, all of them evil. Because they don't care. They're all xenophobes, in a sense, and they don't care. The two closest to good would be the Tau, which they'll accept all races, but you have to follow them under their creed. And if you do not, you could be killed very easily. And then you've got the Eldar, who will help other races, but it is always for their own purposes. It doesn't fail. It ceases to fail. So that point still doesn't make much sense. All these races are still inherently not good. And sure, there are individuals who are like, man, do I really have to kill this Eldar? But if it's a human, I guarantee you the Commissar is going to make sure he kills that Xeno, because if he doesn't, he's dead. Again, broad strokes are useful for grand storytelling because, again, a story can't tell everything a certain way. You have to focus on important things to tell and leave other things just open. Very few stories can pull off everything, and in fact, they don't. Like, Lord of the Rings, it has a lot of grand, and it tells you a lot of things, but it still can't tell you everything.
Might be asking, what if you're playing the kind of game where you're engaging in violence because it's exciting and fun, not because of its moral dimensions, where the meaningful choice is about tactics rather than ethics? Maybe the goal is to take moral calculus out of the problem. Sure, one solution might be saying, all orcs are evil, go ahead and shoot them. But in that situation, as soon as someone inadvertently feels some empathy,
if you're playing that kind of game, you're very likely not going to feel empathy. And even if you weirdly did, it doesn't matter. Like, what would you feel empathetic about? What would happen in a, like a shoot 'em up or just a purely action-based game? Like, where'd the empathy come from unless it was created and put in there for a purpose? See what I'm saying?
as people often do for anything seeming even
Those things are evil. I don't care what you're talking about.
vaguely alive, the easy answer becomes less easy. And if the goal of your game is to stop players from engaging in
Purge the Xenos. Brothers.
moral debates and just fight some bad guys, you kinda gotta say something more reliable than, oh, it's fine, they were all born this way.
You're wrong. You can literally just say, this is a race of people that conquer galaxies. They've come to your galaxy. Fight them. That's all you have to say. I don't get where they're coming from for this point.
Fortunately, the real world's made progress on this problem, because sometimes in this day and age, people actually bear visual signifiers which say, I'm evil, not because of where I was born, but because of the choices I've made, such as Nazi uniforms and clan hoods.
Okay, so I'm a quarter black, so I'm going to add another perspective to what this guy is talking about here. Yeah, you got the Nazi, you got the Klansman. Why only those two, though? We have other groups of like ethnic supremacists out there, or just terrible groups. You've got, you got the Taliban, the Mujahideen, you got ISIS, you've got other ethnic supremacist groups that are in, the black communities, the Hispanic communities. Every ethnic community has its supremacist groups. Now, this is a small point, but they were doing this on purpose for a certain reason. Makes you wonder, why was it?
Then in fiction, we have things like the Hydra logo, a clear visual signifier, but one that denotes choice, not birth.
The funny thing is in plenty of Hydra, like, comics and stories, there's, like, there's black, white, Asian, stuff like that. So showing them as all white could signify something else from their perspective.
And if the statement that a game is making with its backstory and symbols is that an enemy had a choice and they chose wrong, then that gets way less complicated for a game that's interested in...
Neither are complicated. Both work equally well. It's just that you're trying to pull this into a different perspective. If you're playing a game where an alien race is trying to conquer the galaxy or your planet, it's still the case that they're evil. Same as like a group of cultists trying to summon Cthulhu or something. They're still making that decision.
In uncomplicated violence. So whether a game does or doesn't want its players to overthink their characters' moral choices, evil as a choice is just more effective than evil as a bias.
They just ruined themselves with that, because xenomorphs literally propagate, they create more of themselves, and that is their whole existence. And that is a very viable way to start killing things. It's like, it's going to kill you, take your mass, and turn it into another one of them. That's pretty evil from, your perspective. Again, both work equally well. Again, and it also depends on the content of the story. Something they seem to be forgetting here.
Essential trait. But then, of course, if everyone wearing the evil team uniform happens to be an orc, or if every orc happens to have chosen Team Evil, the game wouldn't exactly be communicating that difference very well.
It doesn't need to.
A quick fix here would be to show some diversity.
Yes, because everything, even our bad guys, need diversity.
In the evil team's hiring practices. For instance, with evil humans and elves as well as orcs. Or conversely, introduce orcs who have chosen good and...
Yeah, this is exactly what D&D does, but D&D doesn't have to be the meta for all fantasy. It works in D&D, but it would not work in Lord of the Rings. It most certainly wouldn't work in 40k, where if an orc wanted to join the Imperium of Man, it would not work, period.
And neutral, as well as evil. And a good example of a series getting better and better at this over time is Mass Effect. Because in the first game, Commander Shepard never meets a nice Batarian or a fun Geth. But then, spoiler alert, most of these evil species turn out to be as complex and interesting as the human ones as the trilogy progresses.
Okay, they're both right and wrong about this. Like he said, the classic ones are like, Geth and all that. But two species that never really get evolved that much are Vorcha and Batarians. And I'll get the Batarian one out of the way first because he was talking about it. You never really meet a good Batarian. What you do meet is Batarians who hate you and you're trying to change their perspective of you. That's usually what you meet, unless you're talking about Mass Effect 3, but even then you just feel bad for them because their civilizations have been destroyed by the Reapers. And if you want to talk about Vorcha, no one in Mass Effect likes the Vorcha. Literally, you could command in the game, a Shepard runs over a Vorcha with his car. Nobody would care. The Vorcha are literally seen as the rats of the galaxy. That is a common perspective to have for Vorcha. It's not an evil race, but it is a race literally looked down upon in Mass Effect. So doesn't that kind of mess with the narrative a little bit?
Moral generalizations about species or culture not only doesn't make internal sense, but it also leads to less evocative, less rewarding worlds and games.
Depends on the game.
But we can solve that problem by following our best creative instincts to diversify, deepen, and complicate the worlds we create and its denizens. This way, players won't be incentivized to make snap judgments about our game's orcs or aliens.
Some games can do that well, others don't need to. You can make complexity in your games without having to go to race relations. There are plenty of games that can complicate the worlds outside of race relations. It always depends on what kind of story are you trying to tell.
Aliens or undead based on moral absolutes or body types. Instead, we'll all be driven to investigate, explore, and learn. Our players will invest themselves more in our games. And because they're human, ask the hard questions to push our design into even more enriching and unexpected places. Plus, maybe if we ditch this whole evil races line of thinking, if one day orcs or extra-dimensional horrors or even isekai protagonists pop out of a portal, they'll offer us humans the same courtesy.
Or they tried to kill us, use us for biomass, or destroy our planet. Both are viable options.
I'd call that a win-win.
Maybe. So that's the end of the video, and while I get what they're trying to do, they're doing it from the wrong perspective. It literally only depends on the kind of story you're making. It's not bad game design, it's not bad design, period. It is literally, what kind of story are you trying to tell? Lord of the Rings orcs are bad because the original orcs were literally elves corrupted. If you're talking about the Uruk-hai, they were created to be evil. So were the Reapers. This video is showing a wrong perspective on the conversation, and that is why it still deserves to be talked about today. Now, I want to thank you guys for watching the video. I hope I did a good job of, diving through it for you guys, and I'm going to be adding a lot of different types of videos, or at least trying to the channel, because I'm still new, so I'm playing around with things. I would really appreciate, feedback, because it helps me grow, and I want to entertain you guys. So, thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your day.